okay now?
Yeah, Baruch Hashem, it's back. Apparently, it didn't follow community guidelines. It's probably the most milquetoast page on all of Facebook, so I'm not sure exactly how that works, but
all that inspiration is too much.
Yeah, too much to handle. Apparently so. That was pretty much the consensus in the comments. Okay. Morning. Okay, so Parshas Vayeishev this week. This is the beginning of possibly like the biggest drama in all of Chamisha Chumshei Torah, in all of the Torah of the Chumashim. Perhaps the drama of Yosef and his brothers, which is the origin story of the exile in Egypt. This is where it all began. Vayeishev. So we're starting with the dreams. So Miketz is already once Yosef's already in Egypt, but there's plenty of drama before he gets there. I could see why they're making a Broadway musical about it.
My dad thinks that the full purpose why we have this whole technology, like in Hollywood and stuff, is one day when the shit comes, everything of days can be recreated in a real cool way.
Should do it now. Why do we have to wait for Mashiach to come?
I mean, that's for sure, why we have it, that way. Because I was wondering why. How can we so many amazing things in Chumash, with Midrashim, of course, it's just so cool. And
but why do we have to wait for Mashiach to come? Let's do it now.
I mean, if you want to direct it, let's do it. You need to find a director who will be accurate.
And you need to find someone who's going to fund it before you can find someone to talk to about being a director. Anyways, so this week we talk about dreams, right? We have Yosef dreams, and we have then we're going to have Pharaoh's dreams.
All in one parsha?
Yosef's dreams are in this week's parsha. Pharaoh's dreams at the beginning of next week's parsha. So Yosef has these two dreams. Yosef's first dream is that him and his brothers were in the field gathering together bundles of grain, and then Yosef's bundle of grain stood up, and all of the bundles of grain of all his brothers bowed down to his bundle of grain. And he told them about the dream, which might not have been the smartest thing to do when he was already there was already existing tension between him and them, and obviously this didn't help them like him any better when he told them that he had a dream that basically represented them all bowing down to him. And then he had a second dream, which was similar, but in the second dream it was 11 stars and the sun and the moon all bowing down to him. And the sun and the moon represent Yaakov and Bilhah. So it's a similar idea. The message is pretty much the same. The message of both is Yosef's at the center and his brothers are bowing down. And then in the second one, it represents Yaakov and Bilhah also bowing down to him. The question is, why did Yosef need to have two dreams? Why did he need the message relayed twice in two dreams? One dream, there doesn't seem to be any substantial difference between the two dreams. And if the difference is that in the second dream, it included Yaakov and Bilhah, so just have the second dream and forget the first dream. What does the first dream add? And if he had two dreams, there's obviously a reason. Now, in the case of Paroi and his two dreams that he had, right, Paroi had two dreams. The first dream was that there were these 7 cows. First, there were 7 fat cows that came out of the water, and then there were 7 skinny cows, severely emaciated cows, and the 7 emaciated cows ate the 7, fat, healthy cows. And that was the end of the first, and they consumed them. And once the skinny cows ate the fat cows, it wasn't recognizable at all on the skinny cows that they'd just eaten these fat cows. They were still as emaciated as they were before. That was his first dream. His second dream was about this similar sort of thing, but with sheaves of grain again, and the skinny sheaves. There was the big juicy grain, and then the skinny emaciated wilted grain, and the 7 sheaves of wilted grain ate the 7 sheaf stalks, ate the really good grain.
why did Parrot take dreams seriously? I mean, like everyone has dreams. So why was he so like excited? Like,
It's a good question. First of all, I think back then people generally took dreams a lot more seriously. Perhaps it was also the fact that he had what seemed to be a relatively clear repetition in two dreams in a row. Maybe that also emphasized for him, like there's some sort of message here, which is why after you woke up after the first dream, you fell back asleep, you had another dream that clearly had a lot in common with the first one. So maybe there's something going on here and we need to figure it out. So when Yosef interpreted Paro's dreams, he said very clearly, the reason that you had the dream twice was to emphasize to you that this is urgent, and the phenomenon that these dreams are representing is going to be coming on hard and fast, and you need to get moving. So the dream was repeated to emphasize the urgency of the message. But that wasn't the case in Yosef's situation. First of all, Paro's dreams gave him information which led to a plan, right? Paro's dreams told him about the famine, the plenty followed by the famine, which was the springboard for him then appointing Yosef to oversee the management of the resources and of the grain and storage, etc., so that they could be able to survive through the years of the famine. So there was a very important instructional message there, and it was repeated to emphasize, like, there's something you need to take action on here, and you need to get moving fast. Yosef's dreams didn't really indicate, they didn't give a warning about action that he needed to take. So that there was no sense of urgency. And additionally, what his dream talked about was something that was going to be happening years, like way, down the line. So clearly the repetition of Yosef's dreams wasn't in order to emphasize urgency. So why did Yosef have two dreams? We understand why Pari had to have two dreams. That was different. That was to emphasize urgency. But Yosef, there was no sense of urgency needed to be conveyed with Yosef's dreams. So why did he have two dreams? Obviously, if he had the two dreams, there's a reason. And not just that he had the two dreams, Torah tells us about both dreams in detail. And if Torah is telling us that Yosef had these two dreams, and these are the two dreams that he had, and this is what they were about, and here are the details, Torah is telling us that for a reason. The question is, what is that reason? What message is Torah telling us about Yosef's dreams, or what message is Torah telling us through Yosef's dreams, as a result of which the Torah tells us about both of his dreams, because there is a message and a whole series of messages, really, a series of very, very, very important fundamental lessons about our approach to life that come from these two dreams. And not just each of the dreams, but the combination of the two together. So let's talk about what Yosef's dreams were, right? One dream was about gathering grain in the field. That was the first dream. The second dream was about the stars and the sun and the moon in the sky. Now, I want to take a minute to talk about the ground and the sky. But what's the literal translation of the Hebrew word shamayim?
They have water. What is there?
Okay, good. So I wouldn't say that's the literal translation. I would say you're already breaking it down and getting to more of a midrashic approach to the word.
Like
Yeah, correct. But if you were to just literally translate the word shamayim, what does shamayim mean? Sky. Good. Now, what's another word that people would sometimes use to translate? An English word for shamayim. Bingo, that's the one I'm looking for, heavens. Now, what does heaven mean?
What is it like in Hebrew? There is the other word for sky is rakia.
Okay, so אולי אנחנו יכולים להגיד מה החילוק בין מילת רקיע לשמיים.
Rakia is like reka, background.
But מה הכוונה? כשאנחנו אומרים רקיע, זאת אומרת הרקיע הגשמי, מה שיש פה למעלה, right? שמיים יכול להיות הכוונה הרקיע, יכול להיות גם גן עדן ברוחניות. So the word sky which is the most literal translation of the word shamayim. The sky is this physical thing that's above us. It's a space which is occupied by air, by atmospheric air. That's what the sky is. The word shamayim can also be translated as heaven. Now, what heaven means, the word heaven is a little bit more maybe ambiguous, because heaven can refer to the physical sky. But heaven also, a lot of the time we use the word heaven, perhaps most of the time when the word heaven is used, what people are referring to is spirituality. It's, the heaven, people might say, that someone passes away, their soul goes to heaven. That doesn't mean that the soul like flies up vertically into the sky. That's not what it means, right? Heaven is referring to that which is spiritual as opposed to material, as opposed to physical. And there's a very good reason why the word for sky also refers to, the sort of the spiritual version of the word heaven, to let's call it spirituality. Why sky, the word for sky also can refer to spirituality. And that's because the sky is a very effective metaphor for spirituality, right? So we have the sky and the ground. Now, if anybody has ever been running and tripped and hit the ground at high speed, you find out very quickly that the ground is very tangible, right? The ground is tangible, it's solid, you can feel it, you know that it's there. So the ground is tangible. The ground is close to us. We are close to the ground. It's immediate, it's right here. We're always aware of it. We're in very close proximity to it. As opposed to the sky, which is, first of all, sky air is much less tangible, right? If you have to explain to a 4-year-old kid what air is, it's a challenge, right? And a big part of the reason that it's so challenging is because air is not tangible. Air is much less tangible than the ground is and that the physical objects are. I wouldn't say it's completely not tangible because, and this is actually, this comes to mind for me because I had this conversation with my daughter. I don't remember exactly how old, but she's 7 now and it was a few years ago. So trying to explain to her what air is and what gases are. And I told her, take your hand and wave it really, really quickly and strongly like that. So she did. And I was like, did you feel something? Like, did you feel something blowing against your hand? So she said, yes. So I told her that thing that you felt blowing against your hand is air. There is air everywhere. It's just that it's transparent. You don't see it. So it doesn't look to us like the air is there. And it's very spread out. You don't bump into it. I don't think I said spread out. At the level of the molecules, it's spread out, but it's much softer. I don't remember exactly what I said, but so you don't really feel like it's there. You can just move through it. But if you move really quickly and strongly, you can actually feel, oh yeah, there is some air there. So air, which is basically what the sky is. The sky it's a space which is occupied by air and water vapor, which is clouds pretty much. It's much less tangible than the ground is. And it's also much further away from us. It's not as immediate, it's further away, it's less close. Our relationship with the sky is much more distant than our relationship with the ground. And this makes the ground and the sky very good metaphors for the physical and the spiritual, the material and the spiritual. Things that physically exist, the world of physical, things that are physical, generally to us are relatively tangible. We can relate to it, we can interact with it. So the physical is very tangible to us as opposed to the spiritual, which is completely intangible to us. We can learn about it, we can understand things about it, but our ability to really relate to it and get it is quite limited. And even when we do, it's still only going to be with our minds at the level of concept, ideas, and thought, which is still not the same level of tangibility as something you can actually touch or interact with. Now, important to keep in mind that the sky is no less real than the ground. Right? No one is claiming that the ground exists more truly than the sky does. It's just the nature of the ground is very different to the nature of the sky. The nature of the ground is that it's solid, it's tangible, it's close, it's immediate, it's in proximity. as opposed to the sky, which is equally real to the ground, but less tangible, less proximity. It's further away. Our relationship is distant. It's less immediate. The same thing is true of physical versus spiritual. They're equivalent. The physical is tangible. It's immediate. We have a close relationship with it. We interact with it directly. The spiritual is less tangible. Our relationship with it is more distant. It's more abstract. It's less immediate. So this is why the word for sky also can be a reference to spirituality, which is where the English word heaven is I think it's a very good translation for the word shamayim, because it can apply both to the sky and to spirituality, just as the term shamayim can be used for both. So the literal meaning of the word shamayim, the literal translation is sky. The sky is a metaphor for spirituality, which is why the word shamayim can also correctly be used to refer to spirituality, because its literal translation is a metaphor for spirituality. So shamayim equals sky. Sky is equivalent to or a metaphor for spirituality. Therefore, shamayim can also refer to spirituality. And that their word heaven is also a good English equivalent, which is kind of a bit of both. So Yosef had two dreams. One dream took place on the ground. One dream took place way, way, way up in the sky. So one theme here that we already get in the fact that Yosef had two dreams is that Yosef's experience here included both the ground and the sky. Pari had two dreams, both of them happen on the ground. Now, obviously, if we are going to contrast Yosef's dreams and Paro's dreams, and the things that are represented by Paro's dreams versus the things that are represented by Yosef's dreams, the lessons that we're going to take when we draw a contrast between the two is that we should be looking to live our lives more in accordance with Yosef's dreams, or the messages and the themes of Yosef's dreams, as opposed to the contrasting themes of Paro's dreams. So Paro's collection of dreams, one theme there is, it's all on the ground. It's all physical. Yosef's dreams included one on the ground and one in the sky. Yosef's life was equal parts physical and spiritual. Yosef's life wasn't just about the physical. It also wasn't detached from the physical. And this is already something that's, in and of itself, it's already a very important lesson from Yosef's dreams. The Torah is telling us Yosef had two dreams, and he had two dreams for a reason. Take note, one dream happened on the ground, the other dream happened in the sky. Because in your life, it's important to be involved in matters of the ground, let's say physical, material, and also matters of the sky, of heaven, of the spiritual. We need to have both. So Yosef had one dream about each. Now, that is a lesson in and of itself. And it's also going to be a foundation for some further specific lessons. Some further specific lessons we're going to get about the contrast between and the relationship between the ground and the sky, and the physical and the spiritual. So the first thing is just that. It's easy, and it makes sense that Paro's dreams all took place on the ground, were all about the physical, all about the material, because the fact is, physical is tangible to us. It's very natural. The path of least resistance is that we live life relating to the physical, connecting to the physical, focusing on the physical, because that's the path of least resistance. That's what comes easiest. We're people. The physical is tangible and the spiritual is not, which is exactly why the ground is the metaphor for the physical and the sky is the ground for the spiritual. Now, have people gone in the sky? Yeah. Do people, and people are in the sky regularly, but it takes a whole lot of energy to get someone into the sky. The amount of fuel that a plane has to burn to get the velocity that it needs to be able to get the lift to get that high into the sky is enormous. It takes a huge amount of energy. Why? Because the natural state of a physical object in the world, or a physical object within the reach of Earth's gravity, the natural place for it to be is sitting on the ground. That's its natural state. You want to get it into a state that's not natural for it. You want to get it up into the ground. It's going to take energy, and it's going to take a constant investment of energy. Right? The second the plane's engines turn off, the second the plane stops burning fuel, it's going to stop climbing. Now, you know, the design of planes means that an experienced pilot might be able to keep the plane gliding for quite a while and might be able to land safely without engines, you know, if everything goes well and everyone's lucky and, you know, Hashem helps. But the fact is, the plane's not climbing upward without burning fuel, without releasing energy from fuel, because it's naturally pulled towards the ground. And the same thing is true for us. We are naturally pulled towards the physical, the material. That's what we relate to naturally. That's what comes naturally to us. And if we want to be involved in the spiritual, if we want our lives to resemble the combination of both of Yosef's streams, we want our lives to revolve around both the spiritual, the physical, and the spiritual. The fact is, it requires a constant investment of effort and work. Because relating to, connecting to spirituality, it takes effort. It doesn't come naturally. It doesn't come easily. And we have to have the engines running, pushing us towards spirituality, pushing our conscious experience towards an awareness of spirituality. It's not like, oh, we develop that awareness, we feel more spiritually connected, job achieved. It's like a pilot taking off in a plane and saying, oh, we took off. Okay, let's turn off the engines now. It doesn't work that way. You want to stay up there. The engines need to keep running. If you want to stay connected to spirituality, it requires a constant investment. And just the Rebbe actually connects it to a story of to a story of the Frierdiker Rebbe. When the Frierdiker Rebbe was in prison in Russia, he was arrested for spreading Torah and mitzvahs. He basically told the guards that he wasn't scared. Oh, I think he wasn't cooperating. He wasn't going to talk. I think that's what it was. That's what it was. And so there was a guard who pulls out a handgun from his pocket, a revolver, and he points it at the Frierdiker Rebbe and he says, there are a lot of people who've thought that they weren't going to talk in here. And this little friend of mine, this little revolver made them talk very quickly. So you think you're not going to talk? You're going to talk. Don't worry. And the Frierdiker Rebbe replied without missing a beat. And he said, yeah, that made some people talk, because people who have many gods and one world, one reality, that revolver is going to make them talk. I have the reverse. I have one God and I have multiple worlds. I have two worlds, let's say. It says two worlds. If I, instead of having many gods in one world, I have one God in many worlds, multiple worlds. And so the gun doesn't scare me. Now, generally what people perceive that as meaning is, we have this life and then we have the afterlife. So if someone gets killed, it's like, okay, it's not the end of the journey. They still have afterlife. They still have Gan Eden. They have heaven. But the Rebbe says that's not the full message that the Frierdiker Rebbe was saying. The Frierdiker Rebbe was saying, I have multiple worlds right here, right now. It's not a matter of where he's going, and that, if someone gets killed, it's not the end of their journey, so it's not scary. It's a lot deeper than that. He's saying, I have multiple worlds. The world that the physical reality is only one of many layers of reality that are active and a part of my life. So this whole physical thing is a small part of a big picture to me. So the whole physical thing, it's not that scary. It's not because this comes to an end, but it's not the end of the journey. It's because it's only a small part of a big picture. I have multiple layers of reality that are relevant and active in my life. I have multiple worlds right now, which means that the importance of everything physical has a lot more context. It's not the whole picture. It's part of a picture. There's context. which defines the importance and the role of the physical in my life. And therefore, that doesn't scare me. But nice try. I don't know that the Friedrich Rebbe said the words nice try, but that was the point. That was me embellishing a little. Sorry?
That sounds cooler.
Right. That was the point. So the next thing is, if we're going to look at, so first of all, Yosef has the physical and the spiritual represented in his dreams, as opposed to Paro, that all of his dreams took place on the ground, which represent that his life was all just about the physical layer of reality. That was the entirety of his experience. Then we could also look at the trend between the two dreams in each case. So Paro's first dream was about the cows. His second dream was about the grain. Now, cows are obviously animal, and grain is plants. It's a plant kingdom, the world of plants. And I think it's fair to say, if we wanted to, talk about a very broad, general, categorical difference between plants and animals, I think it's fair to say that animals are alive to a greater degree that plants are. Does that make sense? Right? That the things that we think of as constituting life, there's just more of them present in an animal's life than in a plant's life. Plants are 100% alive, but there is the life of animals perhaps is broader, and it's more alive than plants.
I feel like although I agree with you, like we only know the surface level, what goes on in plants like photosynthesis and stuff. Because, for example, I learned last year that when a tree is about to die, it gives off all its nutrients to the best candidate tree around that current tree, so that it can give the best chance of flourishing. And so
that's
Like
fascinating.
that,
how does it do that? How does it
through the roots, in the ground,
wow,
because there are so many vitamins in the ground, nutrients.
Wow, okay. So the tree will actually excrete its nutrients as it's dying through the roots in the direction.
Yeah.
Wow, that's cool.
So things like that, I think, show us how interconnected, how strong an ecosystem is, whereas humans and animals, they're separate entities, It's like an animal couldn't see another animal energetically.
Yeah. I mean, there's one thing that's for sure is that there's a whole lot more to everything than we, see at the surface. That's for sure.
Some animals have different lifespan than other.
There's always going to be a lot more, and the reality of things also generally is that everything becomes more complex when you translate it to practical reality, right? We talk about ideas and the extremes and the specific instances, and then once that gets translated into reality, everything becomes gray and complex.
I'm really confused. Why are we talking about how we do the connected now? Why are we talking about
plants and animals?
Yeah.
Because Paro's dreams were plants and animals, grain and cows.
Dreams are later. No, they're not.
Yes, but we're going to contrast it to Yosef's dreams.
Okay.
So you learn about plants and some of the physiology of plants and the things that they can achieve in such rudimentary ways, but achieve such incredible things is crazy. But that being said, I think it's still fair to say that animals are more alive than plants are, right? Animals move around. There is communication between plants, but the communication between animals have verbal communication to a degree that plants don't have. Animals move around. I think it's fair to say that just simply put, animals are a lot more alive than plants are. Doesn't necessarily mean they're less fascinating. Also, I think that on that last point, just as a side note, that there are really connections and ecosystems between animals also. it's less tangible because it's not like a bunch of things stuck in the ground, which makes it a lot more complex. But the communication and connection between animals also is extraordinarily fascinating. But that's, I'm actually going to look that up. I'm really interested in that about the trees. So thank you for that. I'm going to check that out.
There's also this thing I read or heard somewhere from one of the rabbis that the trees, they communicate with each other. So like getting sunlight and all that, they won't encroach each other's.
Are they what?
They won't encroach each other's, branches. So
Yeah.
someone's going that way, the other trees say, okay, you go that way. So you get enough sunlight, I get mine. So we don't.
That's so cool.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense that if the tree gets the message that, there's competition for sunlight in this spot, it makes more sense to put its energy into growing in a different direction. And as the trees come close to each other, there's going to start being competition for sunlight in that area. And both trees are probably going to get the message, okay, there's competition for sunlight there. Let's go in a different direction. So that would be the very biological component to that picture. Yeah, nature's pretty cool. It's fascinating. A lot more fascinating than it looks at the surface. Anyway, so that being said, if we can say that animals are more alive than plants are, or they're alive to a greater degree, there is a greater extent of life in an animal's experience than in a plant's. And life, ultimately, there's a pasuk that says, "Va'atem adveikim b'Hashem Elokeichem," and you who are connected to Hashem, Chaim kulchem hayom, you are alive. Why? Because Hashem is life. Hashem is the source of life. And so by definition, the more connected one is to the source of life, the more alive it's going to be. So Hashem is the original instance of life, let's say. And all life that exists outside of Hashem comes from Hashem. Now, if Hashem is the original instance of an absolute form of life, then the more alive something is, the more it resembles Hashem. Right? If Hashem is life, then being alive is a form of resembling Hashem. Being alive, resembling that which is ultimately alive, which means that the more alive something is, the greater the degree to which it resembles Hashem. It's also going to mean that there's in some ways, a greater connection to Hashem, which is how it gets that additional life. And what was the trend in Paro's dreams? In Paro's dreams, the trend started out with animals and then went to plants. The direction of movement in Paro's series of dreams was from that which is more connected to Hashem and has a greater resemblance to Hashem, towards that which resembles Hashem less and has a lesser connection to Hashem. And that is going to be the natural trend in a collection of dreams that all takes place on the ground. So a life that is just focused on and occupied on the material and isn't occupied with the spiritual at all, the natural general trend, the natural direction of movement is going to be away from Hashem, away from the ultimate truth, away from the absolute life. So because Paro's dreams were both on the ground, both were physical, the direction of movement, the trend tends to be from greater life and resemblance to Hashem towards lesser life and resemblance to Hashem. Because Yosef's dreams included both the ground and the sky, the physical and the spiritual, there was heaven in his life. The direction of movement there was from the ground towards the sky. The first dream took place on the ground. The second dream took place in the sky. And this is a really, really, really important lesson here. And the thing to take away from this is not like, oh, he went from the ground to being in the sky. It's the direction of movement. It's the trend. A trend means the way that something is moving, the direction of movement. The trend in Yosef's dreams was from the ground to the sky, from the material to the physical, from that which was lower down to that which is higher up. And the message there is that when we have the sky, the heavens, spirituality in our lives, it's important to make sure that we are always working to be on a trend of moving upwards. Because ultimately, it's the direction of movement that's in some ways more important than where we are. Right? If this is going to be totally, random and arbitrary, but just for the sake of illustrating the point visually, how is Mount Everest like 30,000-ish feet tall? Does that make sense? Did I make that up, or am I recalling that from somewhere?
What?
Mount Everest. Does anyone know how tall it is, ish? So that's Rabbi Google.
Can I ask a question?
Sure. You could ask now.
Okay, I'm just a little bit confused how we transition to thinking the sky again as something that's above us. If when we're talking about like the spirituality, it's like permeates the air everywhere. And then you're saying that the soul doesn't rise towards the sky, it just becomes, it's like in this air.
Okay, so I guess let's try to think about both being true at the same time, understanding that that's the reason the sky is a metaphor for spirituality. Higher up, there's physical vertical distance, and then there's, when you say that we talk about higher worlds or higher layers of reality, it doesn't mean vertically higher up physically in terms of altitude. It means more distant and abstract and closer to the truth, which is, could call that higher up. So whenever we're talking about the sky, it's a metaphor, and physical height is a metaphor for spiritual height, which is why the sky is a metaphor for the spiritual, because it's higher than the ground. And the ground is a metaphor for the physical because it's spiritually lower than spirituality is. Does that clarify the issue that was bothering you? Yeah? Okay, awesome. So yeah, 30,000 feet, 29,029. Okay. So, let's say that someone is talking about their performance, how well they're doing at climbing mountains. And they tell you, I was climbing Mount Everest and I got 10,000 feet up. It's like, to me, that sounds like a pretty big achievement. Now, if that person tells you I climbed the mountain last year or last month and I only got 5,000 feet and I really, really worked, and this time I got up to 10,000 feet, it's like, wow, that's amazing. If a person tells you that, I climb the mountain every month and I usually get up to 20,000 feet and this time for some reason I only made it to 10, your response isn't, wow, that's amazing. Your response is, oh, like, what happened? Like, how come you only made it to 10 this time? Right? So the number of feet, how tall we are, is a very incomplete piece of information. The question is it 10,000 feet relative to 5,000 or is it 10,000 feet relative to 20,000? It's two very different things. It's the same vertical place, but it's two very different experiences and realities if it's 10 versus 5 or 10 versus 20. So the idea here is not just about the value of that which is higher. It's the value of being in a trend of moving in that direction. It's for a person to be able to consistently say every single day, at the end of every day, I'm in a slightly better position than I was at the beginning of every day, and in a better position than I was in the day before. And if we can keep that trend up on an ongoing basis, now again, it doesn't need to mean that it has to be every single day, because reality is we all have tough days, like rough days are a part of life. But if we are, as a trend, constantly moving forward, that says a tremendous amount about what we are doing with our lives and how much value we are extracting out of the opportunity that is our life. we are moving constantly from the ground towards the sky. We're moving from the being materially oriented to being spiritually oriented. The fact that someone is making continuous progress, even if the progress is tiny, tells you a lot more about that person than just the position that they're in. Because what if I just describe someone and say, oh, they're in this really amazing spiritual, situation. And it's like, yeah, but they actually naturally are predisposed to be even better than that. And they used to be better than that. And they slacked off and are not really putting in any effort. And they're still in a much better place than I am. But that's just because they gifted and they started out even better. But they're actually moving down versus the person who's not nowhere near as high, but is constantly moving forward. I mean, there's no question that the person who's moving forward is getting more out of their life and is fulfilling their purpose to a greater degree and is living a more fulfilling life and is making God happier, frankly. Right? So the idea here that's important is not just where we are, but the trend, the direction of movement, the fact that we're moving in that direction. And that's the thing, that the difference we see between Paro's dream and Yosef's dreams. Paro's dreams, the direction of movement was from animal to plant, from more alive to less alive. It was a downward trajectory. Yosef's dreams, the direction of movement between Yosef's dreams was the exact opposite. The trajectory was from the ground towards the sky. And that's the direction that we want our trajectory in life to always be following. The direction should be upwards. And it's important, I'm glad I used the word trend, because if you draw a graph, let's say, of whatever it is, and, we have a bunch of points on the graph. And, let's say we have one here and one here and one here and then one here and 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 one here. It's true that from here to here, there's downward movement, and then from there there's downward movement, and from there there's downward movement. But what a trend means is, what's the overall direction of movement of this graph? The trend of this graph is that's the trend. And that's really what life is, because you know what the fact is, and it's very important to keep this in mind. We all have bad days, and sometimes we have a bad week or a bad month. And it can even happen that we have a bad year. But that doesn't necessarily have to mean that that's it. Like, I had a bad year, it's over. If after we have that dip, whether it's a minute or an hour or a week or a month or a year is irrelevant, if we make sure to continue moving upwards, the fact is that the overall trend is still going to be upwards movement. And the reality of life is that even a consistently upwardly trending trajectory in life is going to have some downs. It is. That's reality. Reality is there are some downs in everybody's life. But the question is, what direction are we moving? If this is the first dream and this is the second dream, the trajectory is upward movement. The trend is upward movement. And so that's the second message here from Yosef's dreams. And there's no way, and what does a trend mean? A trend means a direction of movement. You can't get a trend with one data point. You need at least two. You need at least 2 points on the graph to know what the direction is that it's moving. It's either going up or down or horizontal, vertical, diagonal, but you can't have, in mathematics, you'd say you can't have a vector. You can't have something that has a direction of movement if you only have 1 point. And what you can have on a mathematical graph is a point and then an arrow which shows you which direction it's moving in. And it's still only a point, but the point's moving in that direction. But to get a trend across for us to get this message of the trend of movement in our lives from Yosef's dreams, you need to have 2 dreams. And then when you have 2 dreams, you can see what's the direction of movement from the first dream to the second dream. And that's why, then the question we asked with, why did Yosef have 2 dreams if the general message is the same? And another number one answer is to teach us that we have to have both heaven and earth, physical and spiritual, in our lives. Second is the direction of movement between Yosef's dreams, which is opposite of the direction of movement of Paro's dreams, which is the trend, the direction of movement, the trajectory in our lives always has to be moving upwards. And the third thing is, this one gets almost a little bit kind of meta-ironic. which is that our question was, why does Yosef have to have two dreams if the message is largely the same? And now we're going to take that exact challenge and make that into the answer. A lesson that we're getting here is that Yosef had one dream on the ground, one dream in the sky, one dream with grain, one with stars and sun and the moon. But the message of both was largely the same. Because when we are on track and living life the way it's supposed to be, both the ground and the sky, both the physical and the spiritual, they're on the same team. Our body and our soul make us who we are. They're part of who we are. We are one person that's made up of body and soul. And our life is supposed to be a life that's made up of physical and spiritual. And the physical and spiritual, there is contrast and difference and some very important points of opposition between them. But as far as us and our mission and purpose in life is concerned, they're both on the same team. We are here to bring the physical and the spiritual together and to make the most of both and bring them together into one cohesive, collective entity, a union of physical and spiritual. And so the message here is, the question was, why does he need two dreams if the message is the same? And this is the third lesson that we're going to take away, is that was exactly the point, to show you he had two different dreams, one about the ground and one about the sky, and the message was still the same. Because the message, the point of the physical is the same point and message as the message of the spiritual. We are here not to divide and to move the physical and the spiritual away from each other, but to move them towards each other and to bring them together. And to exhibit in our lives the fact that the physical and the spiritual are on the same team, and we're bringing them together because they do have the same message and they do have the same purpose. Despite the fact that one is physical and one is spiritual, they're on the same team and they're here for the same reason, and the theme and the message and the purpose of both is the same. So ironically here, it's the issue that made us have the question is the answer itself. The answer is, or this third lesson that we take is, the fact that despite being different, the theme is also the same at the same time. Questions? No?
So they're on the same team and have the same reason for being here on Earth, but